All right. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us this evening on the first of multiple webinars introducing the Northern Colorado Fireshed Collaborative. We are super excited to bring this first inaugural, hopefully inaugural webinar about the Fireshed to everyone. Tonight we have Dr. Tony Cheng, who's the director of the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute, and Monte Williams, who's the Forest Supervisor at the Arapahoe, Roosevelt, and Pawnee National Grasslands with us tonight. But before we launch into that, I just wanted to give everyone a few housekeeping rules for tonight or updates. We're recording this tonight, so just so you all know, it'll be recorded and we will share that recording with you in an email after the event. This event lasts for 1 hour. We're going to have both our speakers talk for, roughly half of that time, and then have plenty of time for Q&A and chat after that. So please feel free to put your questions either in the chat box or the Q&A box, and we'll monitor those and bring those up after the presentations. And please do stay connected with us through the nocofireshed.org website and on social media. We have lots going on across the Fireshed that we'd like you to hear about, and other webinars coming in the future. So as I mentioned tonight, we're going to be talking and introducing the Northern Colorado Fireshed to everyone. And I'm really excited to officially introduce this collaborative to all of you. The wildfires of 2020 really drove home the need for restoring our forested headwaters at a larger, more strategic, and more cooperative scale to prevent some of the negative consequences we see from these large, high-intensity wildfires. The question is, how do we get there? How do we do that? And we think that the approach articulated by the Fireshed should be part of that path. The Fireshed is a multi-stakeholder collaborative that has many partners from a range of different walks of life, representing different landscapes, jurisdictions, and agencies. This conversation has been growing for several years among the partners, and we just felt now was a really great time to bring this conversation officially to a larger audience. So tonight, to help launch this conversation, we have two of the people who were instrumental in getting this idea off the ground and up and running, and will share their thoughts on why the Fireshed is important to Colorado's future. So to start us off, we have, as I mentioned, Monte Williams, Forest Supervisor from Arapahoe Roosevelt National Forest and Pawnee Grasslands, followed by Dr. Tony Cheng from the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute. And with that, I will pass the digital microphone over to Monte to begin his conversation.
Awesome. Hey, thanks, Jan. Appreciate it. I'm Monte Williams, and I'm the Forest Supervisor, as Jen said, of the Arapahoe and Roosevelt National Forest and the Pawnee National Grassland. And I've worked for the Forest Service for roughly 30 years, and about half of that time, I was a professional hydrologist, and I spent a lot of my time as a professional hydrologist dealing with the after effects of fire. I worked both on a small team of folks that would go from fires to fires and evaluate flood risk and sometimes even preparing plans on how to maybe ameliorate some of the impacts. But also a couple of the forests that I worked on were tremendously impacted by large fires, and working there afterwards and monitoring and watching the effects, I learned an awful lot about what the impacts of these fires are and the kind of the larger risk that they pose. Today, I want to chat with you a little bit about what happened last year, a little bit around those fires. Won't go into great depth or detail into this, but once you understand what was going on and why what happened. And then I want to take you through the Cameron Peak fire, one of the many fires that was on our forest, and show you some work that the Fireshed had been working on for a number of years, and even some work that had been done a little bit beforehand, but had been incorporated into our plans, and how it affected the fire and I think really made a difference. And so hopefully this conversation that'll tee it up then for Tony to really talk about kind of more of the mechanics of all this and how it works and why it's working. So with that, I'm going to share my screen, and I don't do this very well, so if we have errors, just bear with me. And here it is. Tony, will you nod if you can see my slideshow? Awesome, thank you. So this first slide, I just want to give you a sense of scale. You know, my forest had 3 of the top 5 largest fires ever to burn in the state of Colorado, either completely on it or partially on it. And we also had a few other fires on top of that. So, and as you can look at the state of Colorado, you can see a number of those fires: Mullen and Cameron and East Troublesome, Williams Fork down here, and this is the Calwood fire. And so we were severely impacted last year by fire. Zooming in a little bit, just to give you a sense of scale of how big just one of them is, although East Troublesome would fill the bottom half of this, this is the Cameron Peak fire. And you can see it's a tremendously large fire. We all knew this fire would come someday. And here in a minute, I'm gonna throw some slides up and show you that work. But first, I want to take you to this picture here. And this picture, I believe what I was told, is up by Netherland. But it gives you an idea. I've seen multiple pictures of our forest and how it looked prior to European settlement and then afterwards. And you can see this photo was 20 years ago. So there's already more growth and more trees in that site compared to what it was in that photo. But look at how few trees. These are the exact same photos. It's the exact same site. So really one of the issues that we've got to understand about the forests that we have right now is they're an artifact of what at the time we thought was the right thing to do, that we needed to prevent fires and save the trees. But we had this unintended consequence many years later of having an awful lot of fuel in a place that makes it right for the types of fires like Cameron Peak. So I want to show you something here too. And I'm going to show you 2 red, it's not quite a Sharpie, but it sure looks like circles. And this first circle is around kind of the western half of the Cameron Peak area. And why that's important is this place is all lodgepole pine. We got different trees out there. And this stuff's pretty interesting because when I was here 20 years ago for a short assignment, the beetle epidemic was just starting. Well, now as you look out in those forests, many of those lodgepole pine forests look like this. This stuff's been dead maybe as long as 20 years. And it's standing dry, and under the right set of conditions, it can burn, and it can burn in a big way. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. This other piece is a different part of the country. It's a little lower elevation. And here we have Ponderosa Pine and a variety of other conifer species. And what's interesting about these 2 sites, and I'll show you what that kind of looks like. Here's a typical Ponderosa Pine site in that type of area, is that this side would see fire fairly regularly, where the former site would see it in more of a longer term, 100 to 200 years. And when it burns in a big scale. It burns everything to the ground for the most part. But many of these stands burned every year and had trees growing up in it. And so as we sit and think about what we need to do out there, there's not a simple, just do this and that will solve all the problems. Each of these areas have their own complexities, and you really have to start to think about, when we start talking about solutions, you've got to be specific and really think about how that will lay out in the landscape. So the next picture is the same kind of area I showed you earlier. The kind of dark red, those are all former fires that we've had in the area. You can see Fort Collins there on the right. This is the High Park fire. And those of you that were in Colorado, you know, in the mid 2000s, 2013, you would have seen this fire. And so the next slide I want to show you is what we've realized. And I think what's coming to become better well understood amongst folks that practice in this stuff, oops, I didn't mean to make it go forward, is that we can't just go out and do work here and there willy-nilly and then expect somehow that it's all going to add up to something. And what we've got to do is be strategic. We need to look at our landscape. And remember, as I told you about the Ponderosa Pine versus the lodgepole pine, the topography, the weather, where the value's at risk, where the homes, where the water's at, where important animal habitat's at. You have to look at all those things and make choices around where's your best shot at doing something to create an outcome. And so about 20 years ago, there was a group of folks here that started to work with fire and start thinking about this. They didn't really think at a strategic scale, but they certainly were thinking about the right types of treatments, and started to kind of formulate an idea of what might that look like, because we knew a Cameron Peak was coming. We didn't know when, but we were trying to do something about it. In the last 5 years, this is where the Fireshed has really helped and taken off and really made a difference. In Fireshed, we've brought all the partners, because as you look at this green line, it's not just on national forest ground. There's I think county ground in this, and a whole bunch of other people, and so to be able to go and do treatments that link up across the landscape, and that would have an outcome or an effect on a fire that would change how that fire behaves, we've got to do it on all those lands. And there's sure a lot of people that have an interest in those lands. And so Fireshed's been really instrumental in terms of how do we engage with the community? How do we build this? Where we put these places, and how do we organize work? So the Tony's part's really going to be the best part of this whole discussion. So our plan was, the strategy that came out of all of this work was to build a line of treated ground, so density reduction and then prescribed fire, from the Wyoming border all the way down to the southern end of the park. And we had done quite a bit of work on the northern side of this. I'll see that the turquoise isn't all the work we've done, but it's all the work that was completed all the way. So for example, all of these have had some level of density reduction of trees, and then they were prescribed burned. And somehow my computer is wanting to move forward. And so let me go back. Look like these are actually some prescribed burns in some of those stands. There's less trees in here than what was in before, and actually some of the burning is killing some of the trees, but our end effect kind of looks something like this. So before we start the video, a couple of things is that we've spent the last 5 years, 4.5 years, really working towards this. Not only work on national forests, but a variety of other properties, and we got a lot of it done. As you can see with those turquoise blobs, a lot of work was completed, and so what you're going to see in this video coming up is the actual Cameron Peak fire. I didn't put every day in here because some days it just hardly moves. So you'll watch the dates up in the right-hand corner, and you'll see that they'll skip around sometimes. But here's early August, and there's the fire starting to burn. And you'll notice most of the time it doesn't grow much. But what is concerning for us, and where I'm seeing a pattern across the West, is you see an alignment. And last year we didn't have the monsoon rains, and so we had very dry fuels. And when we've got the right drying and the right winds on those days, Labor Day was the first one, we get big runs. And so it's not the little stuff, it's when this stuff runs in 4, 5, 6, 8 hours and does that is the problem. And there's not much that you can do out there to stop that, except for the type of work that we're doing, because we've taken a look at what's happening there, and actually built a strategy that works. That second run just ran, as you can see, and ran into the red feather area, again, stopping against these prescribed burned areas and other work that we've done. On the south end of this fire, as you can see, with this fire, we didn't get her where we were confident it was out until Thanksgiving week. It was still threatening homes. Here goes the last blowout, and you'll see it kind of pop up. There it goes. And the problem here is we had a project that we were about ready to sign and start working on. We should have been burning it and cutting and doing work in there right now. But this fire just got here too quick. So we had nothing in the way. And so in that case, there was not a thing we could do. When it blows that big, we don't have firefighters right there in front of it, and because it's unsafe. And so here we are with the end result. So what turn the video off. What I think's very interesting about this time, and what's very interesting about Fireshed, is that we've found, as Tony calls, a secret sauce that seems to provide a vehicle in which we can work with communities, talk about these issues, design a strategy, and then go do it at enough of a scale that we can actually make a difference. So for me, I'm very hopeful. I think there's a chance we can do some stuff about this. And I think the key part isn't about the work that we did on the ground, although, I mean, that's important, but it really is the social. It's about how Fireshed really helped the community get to a place that we could make choices and decisions together about what should be done, and then have worked together to make that happen. So I'll stop there and hand it to Tony.
Thank you, Monte. And just want to reiterate Jen's comment in the chat. If you do have questions, make sure to throw it in the Q&A. Well, I want to first of all thank the folks that are organizing this webinar for inviting me, and for all of you for taking this time out on at least here in Northern Colorado, kind of a cold, snowy day, late afternoon. You know, wildfires seem like they're kind of in a distant, conceptual, abstract past and future, but it's right now when these conversations are worth having. My name's Tony Cheng. I'm a professor at Colorado State University in the Forest and Rangeland Watersheds, Forest and Rangeland Stewardship Department. And I also have an extension appointment. And through that extension appointment, I run a couple of outreach and engagement programs. One's called the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute, and the other is the Southern Rockies Fire Science Network. And both of those are really designed and intended to bridge the gaps between the research and the science that's produced at universities and a variety of other research institutions, and the people that need to use that work, that science, and also to co-produce that scientific knowledge through knowledge exchange and interactions. So my organization has been involved with a variety of these forest restoration, wildfire risk mitigation projects for about the last 15 years or so, especially in response to the large wildfire season back in 2002. Those of you that have been around might remember the Hayman fire that burned southwest of Denver around the Cheeseman Reservoir area. And at that time, it really was a wake-up call for the land managers, both on the federal side as well as state, local, and private landowners, that the scale of fires was likely to increase in the coming years. And the Hayman fire was really a kind of a catalyst for that thinking. And at the time, the notion was, well, the managers and the landowner jurisdictions really need to come together to work together to reduce those hazardous fuels through the density reduction, thinning, mechanical, work, removing trees, that kind of stuff, and prescribed burning. But there really wasn't a kind of a larger strategy that was informed by where that work was most strategic and had the likeliest beneficial outcomes on fire. So a lot of organizations, went about doing a lot of work around homes, around their landscapes, and those kinds of areas. And those definitely had an effect, but when you kind of piece those together, they still seemed kind of small, uncoordinated. There was a question about what do those treatments in combination really have an effect ecologically, as well as in terms of fire risk, community protection, and one of our more valuable resources, water. And it's this notion of getting away from kind of more of these uncoordinated projects to something that's more coordinated, more strategic, that really gave rise to this idea of the Northern Colorado Fireshed Collaborative, where leadership like Monte at the forest supervisor level really was open to looking at these approaches in a different kind of way. And so what I want to do is sort of walk you through some of the components of a variety of people that have been involved in kind of brainstorming and putting together the idea of a Northern Colorado Fireshed Collaborative over the last several years, and be able to introduce that to you. So hopefully by the end of this session, you'll have a good idea of what the Fireshed is, what is a Fireshed, who the Fireshed Collaborative is, and what it's setting out to do. So there you have, we have a brand new website. Thanks to folks that have been organizing this series of webinars. You can go to that and check it out. My talk is really around the what, why, who, how of the Northern Colorado Fireshed. So I'll start out with, what is a fireshed? Sounds a lot like watershed, and in many ways it shares very similar attributes, where it's a geographic area that kind of feeds in to a common landscape. So the fireshed is a geographic area where wildland fire has the potential to overlap and interact with socially important resources and assets. So it's fire and human communities and values and things that we care about that constitute a fireshed. And a fireshed is a geographic area where a coordinated mitigation and response strategy could influence wildfire outcomes relative to those values. And the concept of fireshed and even the terminology really comes out of Northern California in the mid-2000s, when folks were really trying to think more strategically, getting away from what was called so-called random acts of restoration to something more strategic, guided by science, involving a variety of stakeholders in coordinating that strategy. And these are fairly large areas, between 50 and 250,000 acres. And so one example kind of visualizing that is the image that I have here on the left is our important drinking water watersheds in Northern Colorado. And so you can see here Fort Collins and Larimer County, and all the drainages that flow into the Cache La Poudre, as well as the Big Thompson, the Little Thompson, all the way going down to Clear Creek. So this is kind of the variety of watersheds, and these are many of them provide drinking water sources from surface water. But if you overlay that with fire risk to those watersheds, then what you see is kind of some different colors popping up where the fire risk to these important watershed surface drinking water values really sort of pop out as important areas to focus on, and perhaps really folks start prioritizing a strategy where you're looking to reduce fuels, perhaps do some work on water infrastructure to harden those against post-fire damages and those kinds of things. And this is from a interactive ArcGIS map viewer by the Forest Service called Forest to Faucets. So this just kind of gives you an idea of what a fireshed might look like relative to especially watershed values. And you know, in the early days, 250,000 acres looking at these areas seemed like, that's pretty big. That's pretty incomprehensible. But as Monte said, that in 2020, there were 3 fires just here in Northern Colorado, Southern Wyoming, that exceeded 200,000 acres. So certainly the fire and fire sheds at that scale is no longer kind of pie in the sky moonshot sizes. Fireshed is also a concept that is gaining national recognition. The U.S. Forest Service, through the Rocky Mountain Research Station, has developed what's called the National Fireshed Registry, where they have compiled a bunch of data sets and run some risk models around values across different scales. And they have it also on an ArcGIS online format. And so you can kind of see some of those. If you squint, my eyes aren't that good, but you can see that Northern Colorado is a hot spot in the US for kind of high value and high risk fire sheds. So data are essential. It's certainly, the kind of data that folks are putting together are really important. They provide a foundation, they provide the scientific foundation, but there's more to fire sheds. And I'll get to that. So where is the Northern Colorado Fireshed? We kind of take kind of a lumping approach where At this point so far, the focus is on the major watersheds in Northern Colorado, from the Cache-la-Poudre through the Big Thompson, Little Thompson, the St. Creeks, Left Hand, and Boulder Creeks. And I say so far because I know that there is an emerging collaborative multi-stakeholder group kind of organizing around Clear Creek in the southern part of this map here. And these are lands generally encompassed by the Arapahoe-Roosevelt National Forest, but also include adjacent and embedded land ownerships and jurisdiction. Again, so far, primarily in Larimer and Boulder counties. And so I want to emphasize this so far because this is a very kind of fluid, informal network, and we're still sort of putting the pieces together as a collaborative. All right, so why and who is involved? And so one of the things that Monte pointed out is that we have in our landscapes different forests that have evolved with fire in different ways. And we know that fire is an essential and an inevitable part of our landscapes. Our ecosystems rely on fire to regenerate, to rejuvenate, and they are simply going to be with us. And so one of the common big ideas is that we have to learn to live with fire, and eliminating fire through active fire suppression, putting fires out all the time, everywhere, under any conditions, is in many ways how we have actually gotten to this place where we have some of these larger fires and explosive fire growths and those kind. So these are contributing factors. So living with fire rather than trying to eliminate them altogether. So the major vision of folks that have really come together in Northern Colorado, and initially it was around the Cache-la-Poudre, and Jen's group, the Coalition for the Poudre River Watershed, was really instrumental in really convening folks and really accelerating this conversation, is to have Northern Colorado watersheds that can support fire, that can actually receive fire, but to do so in a way that doesn't cause long-term loss or damage to watershed services and communities. So we have to accept that fire is part of the system, but perhaps we can do work in ways that can allow those fires to burn, but without losing the things that we value. One of the principles is to restore low and moderate severity fires that were once common, as Monte said, especially in this lower montane Ponderosa Pine dry mixed conifer. A lot of the fires, these landscapes experience fires, but because of a variety of land management and fire management, these are now rare on the landscape. And so where are these places where we can strategically and proactively restore those fires in a way? But also expanding fire management options in ways to reduce future fire risks. So are there ways in which, are there conditions in which wildland fires can burn, especially ones that are naturally ignited, without actively fully suppressing them all the time? Where are those places and under what conditions? So really trying to think more strategically, more proactively, more living with fire. But no single entity has the ability to achieve this vision alone. The U.S. Forest Service can't do it. Larimer County can't do it. Private landowners. Achieving this vision, especially in the kinds of mixed ownership landscapes we have in Northern Colorado, really requires a large amount of coordination, collaboration, communication across ownerships and jurisdictions, if we really want to affect these large fire outcomes. So it's really a vision, like Monte said, of social organization, the social process, and the social dimensions. And this is a set of logos that I pulled from the Northern Colorado Fireshed website. And as you can see, it involves watershed coalitions, like the Coalition for the Poudre River Watershed, but also ones that stretch all the way down to Boulder. Conservation districts, federal, state, local governments, nonprofit, non-governmental organizations, university research programs like mine and the Rocky Mountain Research Station. So it's a very a broad-based group of folks that have really come together to work on these issues. The way we're organized right now, as I said, we're still trying to put together the attributes and what we call the secret sauce, kind of tongue-in-cheek. We kind of organize around 4 coordination teams, one that focuses on operations, especially those fire operations, those folks that have authority and responsibility over fire management, but also on the forest management and the water management side. We have a group that's working on strategic planning and adaptive management, folks that are looking at that large scale, applying a variety of scientific methods and tools to look at risk as well as the ecology side. But also integrating the social side in terms of the monitoring and adaptive management. We have a group that organizes around community education and outreach as a really important attribute to really foster that engagement. And then we have a small steering group that tries to, this is a blurred out picture of a air traffic control tower with, a few folks looking at a lot of screens, trying to navigate, planes coming and going and that kind of stuff. I thought it was a good metaphor for what the steering group does. But really, it's the organization is very fluid, is not very, it's fairly flat. Because really the role is to bridge and to support the on-the-ground work of landowners, managers, and technical assistance providers that are really doing that hard work on the ground. So this is really kind of our organizational structure so far that we're building towards. So what does it actually do? What are we actually doing? Lots of verbiage and the nice website, but one of the important exercises is taking a look at what forest wildfire risk work has already been done and where. And so this is a map that Mike Caggiano at CFRI had put together and really outlines the past wildfires, which are kind of in a light pinkish. The 2020 wildfires, which is outlined with the dark red, as you can see, again, the Mullen Fire, the Cameron Peak, the East Troublesome, Calwood, Williams Fork Fire. And then these are all the past treatments. And what I mean by treatments is these are places where land managers and landowners have done either density reduction through mechanical or manual tree thinning, brush removal, or prescribed fire. And what Monte had said is that at least here in the far northern part of the Fireshed, there's been more effort to have larger areas. Not every acre in these purple blobs, have had some kind of treatment, but they've definitely all been affected by a treatment. And these are fairly large areas, and they certainly look like they had an effect on the growth and progression of the Cameron Peak fire. But you can also see that there's also been a lot of smaller treatments where when the fire hit them, they really didn't do much to affect the fire, and so it really causes us to think about looking at treatments that are larger and in more strategic areas versus kind of these kind of smattering, random, seemingly random acts of treatments. So that's just sort of one exercise, just sort of looking at and who's doing what, but then going through an exercise of what more work needs to be done and where, and how can that work be done in a more coordinated, strategic manner to affect those outcomes. And you've heard both Monte and I use the word outcomes because a lot of the focus in the past has been focused on outputs, whether it be the number of acres treated or the volume of timber extracted. Those don't really tell us about the effect of those treatments on outcomes of fire to the values that we care about. And we also want to focus it at the scale that fire operates, so at the Fireshed scale. So that's what's really taking this more strategic, coordinated look at the work that needs to be done to affect fire outcomes. kind of digging a little bit more fine grain kind of approaches. I kind of try to think about some more simple ways of portraying this. Talk about 4 S's and a T. Couldn't figure out what the 5th S is here. So the first is again, using the word strategy. And what we mean by that is that with so much risk on a landscape, this is actually Chaffee County in central Colorado, similar type of issues with lots of risk to lots of values, but so few resources, right? So you need to prioritize where those locations are proximate to where those socially important resources and assets are, and what those treatments are that produces the largest benefit. So you're really making well-informed, strategic informed decisions about where you're going to prioritize work. The second is S is scale. Doing the planning, the analysis, the implementation, monitoring, and adaptive management at the scale of fire. Doesn't mean we're going to be treating 200,000 acres in mechanical thinning and burning, but it means that we need to look at the kinds of fire risk, the ecology of the forest, the water shed values at the scale of a fire shed, not just kind of at the project scale. And again, just kind of showing more of a still what Monte was the video showed, where you had some big runs that hit into fairly large prescribed fires, and you had other runs where it kind of blew through a lot of the smaller treatments. Third S is science, and really using and leveraging the best available science, not just the biophysical science in terms of forest ecology, fire science, climate, wildfire, wildlife, but also integrating kind of what we know from social and economic sciences about leveraging local knowledge and values, and using kind of what we call a return on investment methodology. Where are those places where you're going to have the highest benefit comes for your treatment costs, and then really focusing where those treatments are. In fact, if you look, this is a project that Ben Gannon with CFRI did for Peaks to People Water Fund, which operates within this the Northern Colorado kind of watersheds to raise funding to do these kind of preventative pre-fire mitigation projects. And if you actually overlay some of these red areas, these high value areas, that actually align very well with a lot of the areas that were treated in the Northern Colorado Fireshed Collaborative. So the science really does inform those kinds of beneficial outcomes. Fourth S is stakeholder support, and this is really where that community education and outreach coordination within the fireshed is really beneficial, where you can really reach out into the variety of communities of interest and community of place to create inclusive, transparent, and actively participatory processes. So we really rely on these community-based organizations and the leaders within those organizations, having some third-party facilitation to help really make those conversations smooth and make it really hands-on. And unfortunately, right now, with virtual meetings, this is the furthest thing from hands-on learning. But as you can see, a lot of the kind of work that we build on is very hands-on and very interactive. And then the T is tools, all the tools in the forest management toolkit. We need them all, from the mechanical to manual forest vegetation, prescribed fire, and managed wildfire. So those options in addition to full suppression. And probably one of the more important tools are the variety of ways in which we reach out, we engage, the variety of communities of place and of interest that have interest and concerns over these fire sheds. So how can you get involved? Just kind of gave you a rundown about the Fireshed Collaborative, kind of how we see it being different than what's been done in the past. So how can you get involved? One is that we have a brand new website with some social media presence as well. So following us, checking out that website, participating in Northern Colorado Fireshed Collaborative education and outreach events like this one, to be able to learn more about the intersection of wildland fire, forest, water, climate, recreation, all the things that are really drivers of change that are affecting our landscapes here in Northern Colorado. Get involved with one of your local watershed coalitions. Again, on the website, you'll find links and connections to those watershed coalitions. We all live in watersheds, and watershed coalitions are a great way of getting involved with doing your part in conserving and sustaining the resilience of your local watershed. Same with local conservation districts. These are kind of local government, quasi-governmental entities that really have a great impact on soil and water conservation. And then getting involved and telling your elected officials why and what you think is important about this work. They have an important role in supporting in a variety of ways, either through funding mechanisms or through policies. And just having that support from elected officials is really important because these are very kind of out of the box thinking and kind of risky. And so we need to have those folks to be able to understand and really support this work. So that is the end of my presentation. Hopefully left enough time for some questions and some interaction.
Yeah, that was excellent. Thank you, Tony. And I realized one thing, that I didn't introduce myself at the beginning of this webinar. I just launched into things. So just for those of you who don't know me, my name is Cheng, and I'm with the Coalition for the Poudre River Watershed. And we've been a partner almost since the beginning with the Fireshed. And, just to, pick up where Tony was leaving off about like how you can get involved and the role that the watershed coalitions across the Front Range are playing there. We've been across Boulder County and Larimer County. We've all been working really closely to put out a lot of different types of events. So there's a lot of outreachy sort of educational events, but we've also been starting to grow like a landowner training series as well with our partners at the Ember Alliance. So we've been hosting like pile burning workshops and pile building workshops. And so there are both educational ways to get involved, there's planning ways to get involved, and there's also like boots on the ground training kind of ways to get involved. So do keep in touch on the NOCO Fireshed pages or your local watershed coalitions, because there's lots of ways to get involved in fun activities. So I'm gonna move us over into some of the questions that have been popping up in the chat box. I'm just gonna start from the last ones that I'm seeing at the chat box. Allison Lohr is curious, and I apologize if I'm not pronouncing that properly, Allison. Is there a reason why there are fewer treatment areas between Red Feather and Estes Park? And I think that probably is a Monte question.
Probably so. I think it's a great question, and there's kind of a simple answer, and then there's kind of a deeper question that I think kind of comes back to the Fireshed and kind of the whole perspective of this and what we're doing. So the simpler answer is, as we started about 5 years ago, ramping things up, a lot of the work, the pre-work that was necessary to actually do the prescribed fires. You saw the difference between my little turquoise blobs and Tony had a lot more stuff that showed it had been treated. A lot of that was density reduction. There had been a lot of logging and cutting of trees to get to the stand where we could actually burn it safely. And so that work actually was started and planned back 15, 20 years ago. And so in terms of, as we were looking at that environment and where would we focus, we felt we could get the best bang for the buck to finish that piece first. We had a project coming online. It was within days of being signed before the Cameron Peak fire started, that actually was going to fill that gap and was starting to work the way south down south from the Poudre River. So from a simple standpoint, it's just that. It's just these projects don't start and stop on a dime, and a lot of the work had been done in years previous, and so it really created an opportunity for us to utilize some of that past work to create this interlinked strategy. I think the larger philosophical question is this. We're severely limited in money and in resources and people to be able to do these things. And so there's certainly an element of when we have a coalition for the Poudre watershed and a community, the communities that they've been able to engage with, and a lot of social support for the efforts. And we've got a lot of agreement about what should be done, which is a lot of the effort of what the local watershed collaboratives are doing and working to try to come up with. It creates it where it makes the amount of effort that we put in for the amount of benefit, it's at its best and finest ratio. And so as I'm looking at where do we invest time and effort, what we're trying to do is get the best work done we can right now. And so some of this has to do with our communities ready, and are they ready to come together and talk about this? And if they are, then it's a great place for us to invest. And if they're not, then they're probably not in a place ready to receive a lot of work. And so that's in terms of the philosophical piece of that question, that's where I see that and part of that reason.
Great, thanks for that. So we have another question. I'll hop over to the Q&A section. Evan Barrientos is curious, what are the limiting factors to forest restoration and wildfire mitigation in Northern Colorado, and what needs to change for us to be successful?
You want to start, Tony?
Yeah, I think those are, I think of that question because I think those are also barriers that are extend way beyond Northern Colorado. Is that, part of it's the money, but even if you threw 10 times as much money, would you still be able to get the kind of work done to achieve those outcomes? The way we do that is through that social development, that working with our partners across those land jurisdictions, and also that community engagement and support. In my interpretation of one of the barriers is that, from my perspective, a lot of land managers oftentimes have sought the path of least resistance. So they'll try to find project areas and project sizes that they feel like they can just do without a lot of community and public blowback. Because it's hard, right? Engaging with people that have different views and values and going through that long process of co-learning together, that gets in the way of just going out and doing stuff. But that's what we need to do. And I think that's what's held back the kind of work at the kind of scale that probably needs to happen. We see this across the Western US in fire-prone areas, and the places where you can really start building a network at the size and scale and the intensity that really has an effect on outcomes and also restores the ecological processes is where people spent years and years developing that social legitimacy, that social agreement. And that's really one of the big bottlenecks to do this kind of work. We can have all the firefighters and all the trucks and burners in the world, but they're limited. They're inherently limited in the kind of prescribed burning and proactive fire management because of that social part.
I so agree with exactly what Tony's saying, and the way I kind of approach that or look at that when I'm talking to our regional folks, my counterparts and our regional forester and such, is we kind of act like somehow the technical expertise or there's some other big reason why we're not able to do this stuff. And the truth is, the technical stuff is we have some of the best darn folks in the whole nation sitting right here that know fire. And there's a lot of those folks around. So we got all the technical expertise. We know how to do this. We know how to do the burns. What really is the limiting factor? And it is about the social acceptance. In essence, having the community, what it comes down to me is communities, I believe, have to own the risk with us. That these actions that we do, the prescribed fires, are not without risk. They have risk with them. Even under the best set of circumstances, there's some level of risk. And so for us to go in and engage with the community and really do this at scale, we've got to have the community on board with us and understanding that risk and accepting it, not for us to be sloppy or lazy in the execution of the burns or the work, but rather engaged in the process to develop it, informed about what the consequences are, and supportive as we work through that process. And if they are, then doing the work is 100 times easier. It's a lot cheaper. It's easier to find money to do it. And so really, it is around this creating this social license to do the work. A lot of what the secret sauce here then isn't so much around some new model or a new tool or something else to go do this work. It's about how do we approach communities and engage in this conversation and then build the strategy that makes sense from that. That's where it's at. And that's where I think of all the barriers, it's the biggest one.
Well, so touching on some of the issues that you guys brought up, there's another question from Paul Orbuck in the Q&A, wondering how much all of this is going to cost and who's going to pay for it. And then a second part to the question, which is, I think, kind of like an operations and maintenance question. How long will it take, recognizing trees keep growing and work will go on indefinitely? Can our watershed be better able to receive fire in 5 or 10 years, or is it more like 20 or 30 years?
You want me to start on that one, or you want to start, Tony?
Well, I'm not going to, thanks a lot, Paul, for that great question as usual. And it's a fair question. I think it's an important question to, so here's my answer. I'm not going to throw out a number right now because I think we're still developing kind of the scaling up. What I will say is that there is a lot of money that goes into fire every year. I don't know, Monte, I think probably this past year, wildland fire cost to just the federal government alone is probably almost about $3 billion. And then you throw in the cost to state and local governments, the cost to communities that had the stuff for economic stuff. So the money is there. But what we end up throwing money at is for implementation, is to do stuff. A lot of what Fireshed is about is really is staging the social development as well as the technical, the strategic planning, and getting the operations folks to work together in stages. The first stage of this is actually probably, I will throw a number out, probably $50,000 to $100,000 a year to have a good facilitator, a good coordinator, and kind of a baseline level of technical expertise that can bring the models into this participatory planning and social process. And then you develop a strategy, right? You have maps, you have a vision, you have commitments and agreements among a variety of your stakeholders. And then from there, then you start staging, okay, where would we want to go first? Or where would be the first 8 projects that that appear in our priority map? And then you would have to go down and look at, what are those treatment costs? How much, who would need to be involved? That's a calculable cost. We're starting to get there. We can probably derive some of those costs already, and that's a project that we'll probably have to work on with our SPAM team, the Strategic Planning and Adaptive Management team. And then once you get that going, then you have that longer term 5 to 15 to 20 year maintenance where you're going back. The theory is you have high costs to set up a landscape to receive fire, but then once that landscape is set up, that the cost theoretically would be lower every year as you are in maintenance mode. But we'll get on that, Mr. Orbuck.
I again, hard to disagree with Tony on anything, particularly things around fire. One of the things maybe that I would dive into, because I agree completely, when you think about this larger perspective, we have a research scientist in fire by the name of Mark Finney, and as he was here on the forest at one point talking with me about what kind of things could we do to make a difference. Some of this larger scale strategic stuff was part of the conversation we were having with him. But he said, look, Monte, already in the Front Range, you already have a burn program. It's just that you do it on years like last year, and you pay a whole bunch of money to kind of shepherd that thing and try to keep it from burning down houses. But the truth is, if we switch to some other type of program, and particularly here with the Ponderosa Pine and some burning and things like that, that we can change all that around. But either way, you're still going to have to burn in the Front Range to be able to manage and to be able to create an environment in which wildfire can be in and not wreak havoc and not be uncontrollable. And so that this idea of investing and how we do that, I think it really is a fundamental question. Do we continue to invest in the suppression side and lots of money and see the negative consequences from that? Or do we start to realize we need to focus on the preventative side, this piece, and or I wouldn't call it a preventative, but the side that changes the landscape in such a way that it can accept fire. If we do that, there is a bust of money up front that's got to be invested to make that happen. Over the long term, it's a heck of a lot cheaper, especially in the areas where we have prescribed fire and Ponderosa Pine and that stuff. We actually can use starts at some point in the future, not now, but a wildfire starts, and we may have a piece of ground that's treated so well and it's ready and it needs to be prescribed burn. We may just have the firefighters go ahead and expand that out a little bit, but we got a ways to go before we're ready to do that here. So the maintenance in the end may actually come back to not just us igniting the fire, but allowing kind of the natural progression of lightning starts and other things, the maintenance of the stands in the long term. And that's, I think that's our longer term hope is getting the landscape to a point that's how we end up managing fire. Great question.
And just to add to that, I think we can't talk about funding without talking about the sustainability of the funding. Right now, so much of this work that's done on our landscapes is very grant dependent. And so that reinforces the random acts of restoration and working on smaller scales. And so if we really want to get to these like treatments of scale, we need to figure out ways to invest at the front end of these treatments with more predictable pots of money. There's been some efforts at the state legislature to try and address that, but that's a big need. So we only have a few minutes left here. We still have some amazing questions in the Q&A in the chat box. But one person asked about smoke, where there is fire, there's going to be smoke, and how that might limit prescribed fire work and around air quality regulations. So maybe if one of you could touch on that, and I'll see if we still have time to get to some of the other awesome questions that are in the chat boxes.
Why don't I take first stab at it? I think our level of sophistication of understanding under what conditions we can have good smoke dispersal and thus not be limited by state standards and such, I think has gotten a lot better over the last number of years. There's a lot to this because in the end, what ends up happening is it's not on the day that you plan, but if something goes awry, like you get maybe the fire doesn't burn as quickly or something, and it stays in there for an extra day or so, and then we get a change in weather, and then that smoke fogs out town, and that's where we start to see problems. That's always a possibility. It always is, and there's always some chance of it. But we spend a lot of time thinking about that and what kind of conditions, and not just looking at the day we want to light it off, but how does the following days go in case we're not able to completely burn out a site that first day, and we got to carry it in a day or so. And so we've even had situations where wildfires have popped up and we've had to kind of tamp down a fire. We didn't light anymore, but it hadn't completely burned yet. So it still was skunking around and throwing some smoke up. the long and the short of it is that we spend a lot of time thinking about that. We've got actual air quality monitors. We've got specialized positions that help us monitor that. And of all the time that I've been here, all of our fires have been extraordinarily away from any type of limit of air quality. And we've had really good luck. I know there'll be a day where we will smoke out Fort Collins for part of a day. Just the odds of it over the amount of work that we've got to do into the future says that that will happen occasionally. But if we don't, how many summers, is it every 10 years then? I mean, we think Hayman and High Park, and now the next 10 years was the fires of this year. What's coming in 10 or more years is a minor day or two of that okay occasionally, and only in the worst shape, or only in the worst case where things go awry, compared to a guarantee of this every 10 years, and not just for a day, but days and days. And look at us this year. We were early October, August, all the way through Thanksgiving, we were still throwing smoke. So that would be my answer to that question.
Great. Well, thank you for that. Unfortunately, we're out of time, so I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of the questions in the chat box. We'll try and do our best to follow up on some of them with resources in the follow-up email. There will be other Fireshed webinars coming up. We have one scheduled each month for the next couple of months. In May, we'll be hearing from researchers and the Canyon Lakes District Ranger about prescribed fire interactions, more detailed scientific interactions between the Cameron Peak and prescribed fire treatments, and how those treatments also helped operationally on the ground. So please check that out and stay tuned for more information. Maybe you can get your questions answered at that one. And again, just thank you to our panelists. That was a fabulous conversation. And thank you to all of you taking time on your Thursday evening, or Wednesday evening, sorry. I just want it to be the weekend, for sharing your time with us and learning with us. We hope you join us again at a future webinar. Thank you.
Thanks.